Welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet and this special edition podcast conversation hosted by the Scandinavian Textile Initiative for Climate Action during our Climate Action Week. I am Mike Schrager. We continue our focus today on the elements needed to enable decarbonization at the pace and scale needed and climate action more broadly. Again and again, the discussion about financing comes up. It comes up continually in almost every discussion. A number of years ago, I interviewed someone from the Good Fashion Fund who was telling us about an initiative they were starting to demonstrate that investments in textile manufacturing are possible investments that could lead both to environmental performance improvements, social impact, and financial returns. And the idea was to see how this would work in practice because not much had been done in the textile industry. And so since then, the Good Fashion Fund has been operating, and I think lessons have been learned. So we're excited to bring back new representatives of this fund to talk about what has happened since then, what lessons have been learned, and what's the way forward. Keep in mind, with decarbonization and climate action, the financing aspects often deal with questions like how much is needed for which solutions, who's going to pay, how is risk shared, how to ensure impact, and how to ensure returns for those who invested. But without further ado, I'd like to ask Jay and Bob to present themselves and their organizations and take us through the learning and the next steps. So welcome, both of you. Who'd like to start?
Let me kick off. Thanks. I'm Bob Assenberg. I'm one of the two founding partners of Found, which is an impact investment firm and strategic advisory. We only focus on impactful initiatives in emerging market and developing countries. And the Good Fashion Fund is one of the 4 funds that we manage currently, with 3 other funds. 2 are more in the agriculture space, so sustainable agriculture, and one is more on cook stoves and water solutions, and related to pre-financing of impact receivables, carbon credits. So we have a team based in the Netherlands, and we work very closely with a number of partners worldwide. So we have either on a sector basis or on a geographical basis, we work with partners. And what we do are new initiatives that have not been proven before, really with the idea to demonstrate that it is feasible to do it. And we take the learnings from the first fund and then further upscale it with the same investors typically, and also with more investors coming in. So that's what we do. And in addition to the 4 funds I just mentioned, we do strategic advisory with a number of parties like that could be governments, that could be development banks, could be foundations, could be corporates overall. But everything that we do is in a blended finance setup. So always with different kind of investors with different focus.
Thanks, Bob. And Mike, thanks for having us here. My name is Jayanth Kashyap. I'm the investment lead for the Good Fashion Fund. What I've been doing basically for the last decade or so is within impact investments. That's primarily using capital, essentially using it to deploy towards really deep-rooted issues. And for the past 5 years, I've been focusing on the fashion industry. Besides making investments into manufacturers, which is what we do, I also oversee the portfolio and also take care of E&S and impact elements also. That's from my side.
Okay, so I was right, wasn't I? That this started, the Good Fashion Fund started a number of years ago, and it's been going as a demonstration fund, as you, Bob, described in terms of what the purpose was initially. So tell me if I've gotten that right. And, you started it specifically for textiles, even though you do other things. So is there more you want to say about what you've achieved to date?
Sure. I can tell you a little bit about it. And you are right. Indeed, the fund has been set up. And it is just to be clear on that, the fund has been initiated by the CNA Foundation at the time, now Lourdes Foundation, as well as Fashion for Good. Doing research, particularly, I think, in Asia, seeing what could be done in order to make the apparel sector more circular and also more inclusive. So that was the idea. So, and with the angle from the finance angle, I would say. So looking at social and environmental elements, but particularly how can we actually support and accelerate the change in the sector towards more sustainability from a financing angle. So a report has been done, and they've been looking for a fund manager, and actually that's where we actually got contacted, and so since that was around 2018 or so, that's about what the time we're talking. We worked jointly with the Lourdes Foundation and also with people from Fashion for Good to set up this fund. And what makes the fund different is that it's focusing on manufacturers, suppliers. So what you do see, and that's certainly also these days, but also at the time, there were some initiatives for financing, but they were often either at a more NGO grant level, which is of course also very useful, or they were at brand level, but not so much at the manufacturers themselves, the suppliers. So that was really the idea. What can we do to take that suppliers to one step ahead in terms, or two steps ahead in terms of sustainability? So jointly, we drafted the investment strategy, and we concluded that we want to target the type of suppliers that are willing, intrinsically motivated to become more sustainable and have a certain level of revenues. And we did not look at the really big ones, but we looked at the suppliers between, let's say, 10 and 100 million revenues in dollars, and primarily in India and Bangladesh at the time. And also with the idea that we can take them to further sustainability by supporting them on implementing and adopting equipment, disruptive new equipment or very impactful equipment. And that is often very needed in this sector, because if you look at it in that respect, it's a relatively old-fashioned, so a lot of old machines and old processes. And I think by improving that, you can certainly improve from the climate angle, but also on the safety angle from the workers' point of view. So what we've done at the time is set up the fund. It was launched just before COVID, unfortunately. So it was not the right time to launch a new fund. But we still managed to grow the fund a bit with the contribution by the Lourdes Foundation, the Mills Fabrica, which is a family office from Hong Kong. And we also managed to get the Rabobank on board. And then at one point in time during COVID, we said, well, okay, let's start with the first fund, which is the 20 million fund, roughly 20 million, and demonstrate by making investments that it really can be done from a social and environmental point of view, but also, and that's really important, that it does bring financial benefits. So it is debt that we have been providing, US dollar debt, but also hand-holding and support from advisors in order to bring them to the next level. And it has not been an easy task. Also, during COVID, it's been clear that there were a lot of challenges also for the suppliers, and the challenges were not about finding the new initiatives, but it's really much to stay alive in that respect in terms of from a financial point of view. But I think also that what we learned during this time is that if you work with smaller SMEs, and we see that with the other funds as well, not everything is completely already produced and in a way that we're typically looking at it from an international investment point of view. So I think what we've learned along the way is, and that is, I think, is a good thing in those years, and we just finished the investment period, that you can make these investments, and these investments make sense from a financial, from a social, and from an environmental point of view. So it really demonstrated long-term investments, because that's what we do, long-term investments with suppliers, and suppliers that are willing to move further and to become more sustainable. It can be done, and we can help them as well. So it's not just finance that we provide, but it's also support, linkages, action plans that we do jointly with them, and we do that jointly with our partners. So we're based in Amsterdam, so we can't do it all by ourselves. But I think what we built up in these number of years that we have been doing this is a rich network of local and also, I would say, global advisors that can help us on technical, on social, environmental, but also on legal assessments. Okay. So I think what we've learned, it's been a long journey, it's been a long answer, but I think it's taken time. Where we are right now, we understand the market, we understand the challenges, but we also see that it makes sense from many angles to do these investments.
When you say you're funding supplier partners, was this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? Where do you focus?
Yeah, it's mainly been in some of the integrated companies, what you do see. So particularly, I think on sustainability, where you do see most of the impact and the need for capital expenditure is not always in tier one. It's also the tier two and the tier three. So you do see, for instance, in the wet processing, that's where you do see the need. You do see that we wastewater treatment plants that we've been investing in, also some renewable energy. But not that many tier ones. It's often integrated in tier two and tier three. I think that's where a lot of the investments are required, and these are long-term investments because they have a longer payback period, and often local banks are not equipped. Or don't understand that too much in order to provide the finance. So for the finance might be available, but not I would say at the longer term maturity actually that we offer. So
And
it's
what's a longer term? How many years are we talking about?
yeah, so it's 5, 6 years. That's roughly what we're looking at, which would actually, that's the way it's been calculated. And we also make financial calculations. So it coincides with the payback period of the investments.
Okay. And when I read about this, it sounds like your goals are that the investment ideally should lead to a 50% reduction in one of the environmental areas, right? Water, materials, chemicals, or waste, or energy. Is that how you decided, and has that worked?
Yeah, I think the decision that was an upfront from the that's how we jointly with the Lourdes Foundation at the time we created the investment strategy and really want to make a big impact. In that respect, we decided that we only do innovations or we do purchase of equipment that has this 50% or more impact on those matters you just mentioned. And what we've really done baselining, base case, and then actually we do measure. So we do measure basically how in terms of the savings. And so far what we've seen, because we recently did a couple of investments where we still need to see the results, but it has worked. So I think that is the really good thing. So we've done the tracking, we've done the monitoring, and these investments have actually produced more than 50% difference in terms of reduction of water usage or energy or chemicals. So in that respect, I think that's why it's also a demonstration fund. It shows that it can be done.
Okay, and the blended finance, you said this model. So why is this model suited for impact at scale? Because you now demonstrated with I don't know how many investments, how many manufacturers, if you can say how many you invested in, but you have this model that you say you've now shown you can show the reductions on the social environmental side. You can also show the financial returns. Can you show that? And why is this model, this blended finance model, suited for scaling up now beyond demonstration?
Yeah, so it's the blended finance model, and maybe to give a bit more background explanation on that, it's basically bringing different type of investors together, all with a different initial or primary focus. So it's a mixture of often junior investors, as we call them, mezzanine and senior investors. So the junior investors really are often the sponsors, have a focus on the impact, on the change. The mezzanine are often in line with the development banks, so also, or mezzanine is often also semi-commercial, and then the senior investors are the investors that would like to see the return and are also very much interested in the impact. So I would say the junior is more impact first in that respect, up to the senior, which is more, I would say, financial return first, but really with the intention that also the impact should be made. Those setups do work because the pot of money that you work with in the end is much bigger. So by bringing them together, having an investment suite that everyone subscribes to and everyone really supports, you have more money to invest. So that's typically what we do see with our investment funds, which all have a blended finance structure. For the Good Fashion Fund, typically the first fund, you need somewhat more, I would say, the more junior, so more impact-focused money in order to demonstrate that it does work. What you do is then afterwards, you take the learnings, you take the processes, the methodologies, the network that you already have, and apply it to a second fund, where you would need less of that money because it's the demonstration fund is often also to to show that the perceived risk is actually not that high. So once you have done that, once you have demonstrated that, and you can show the impact at the same time, it means for a second fund that you can actually have more of the mezzanine and also of the senior investors and a relatively lower amount of junior capital. This is the setup. So that what we typically do is that you have a first fund to be then scaled up with the second fund, taking the learnings, sometimes some slightly adapted approach, but using everything that you already have. So this model does work, and we've made 6 investments, but Jay can tell more about that.
Okay.
And we expect to do more. Yeah.
That would be good to hear more. And Jayanth, come in now and give us your perspective as well. I know that one of my questions is the specific way that the fund has addressed climate action and decarbonization. I know that you also are interested in talking about looking at fair labor practices and gender aspects in the supply chain. But come in where you want, because Bob has covered a number of things already.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, before I talk about specifics, I think the idea of the Good Fashion Fund really at the time, I mean, if we turn the clocks back to 2018 or 2019 or even earlier, there weren't too many initiatives that were focusing on, let's say, supply chain improvements or investing in the supply chain. So fundamentally, I think the fund had an objective to kind of shift how the industry itself addresses its climate and, let's say, social footprint. And I'm not talking just about policies. It's, I think, what we are trying to do and showcase to the others is that we're trying to direct capital into the actual sites of transformation, and those would be the factories. And the long term flexible funding that we provide, particularly to manufacturers in India and Bangladesh, that's so that they can specifically invest in technologies that are either proven and established but still impactful, or let's say next generation technologies that could be disruptive. And to put that into numbers, so we made about 6 investments so far, 4 in India, 2 in Bangladesh, and cumulatively that's about 9 factories in total across tier 1, 2, and 3. So we have decent split amongst those factories also. And the capital's being used to invest in energy efficient machinery that could be spinning, weaving, knitting, all the way through the final garmenting phase. We've particularly in the wet processing side, we've also invested in water efficient machinery also. Of course, we try to look at other technologies as well. Yeah, for a long time, we're trying to see if waterless dyeing or salt-free dyeing solutions are possible. I think they're there in the market, but not yet commercially at scale. We invested in zero liquid discharge systems and effluent treatment plants in Bangladesh, where it's very critical and an upcoming kind of investment. Beyond that, a little bit in renewables and solar also. But I think not to, I think ultimately all of this means that this is most impactful in the deeper tiers, as Bob was saying. So I think the tier ones are obviously the most visible to the market, but there's a whole host of factories. And if you look up open sources like Open Supply Hub, there are thousands and thousands of factories in all of these producing countries. And no one really knows in terms of who they are, what they do, what exactly their emissions are. And that's what we want to focus on. And that's where the bulk of the impact can also be achieved. But ultimately, what we believe is within the discussion of climate action and decarbonization, we should also talk about equity. Because without equity and without considering the impact what it has on people, our view is it's just plain optics. Sustainability would just be plain optics if we discount that factor completely. Considering that if you look at the number of workers employed in these factories, predominantly they're mostly women. And in many of these regions, basics are not there or still in the works. Labor violations do occur, and there are a lot of issues to need to kind of focus on. So if you're talking about a just system, it has to work both in terms of reducing the environmental footprint, but also making sure that it benefits the people who are within those 4 walls, making these goods, these clothes that we are wearing right now. And that's what we call as the 5 goods within the fund. That's basically how we define the impact. So you have your good energy, good water, and good materials, but equally also the good lives, which is the social element also. So that's why we're really passionate about both climate justice and social justice, if I can put it that way, though we don't talk about in those terms specifically.
So how do you, because I talked about 50% on the environmental side, what's the measurement on the social side for workers and women,
Great
frankly?
question. So
Yeah.
I think the nice thing of being an impact fund is we have the flexibility to structure these investments against specific, let's say, KPIs. I think on the environmental side, as you rightly said, it's quite straightforward or relatively straightforward to set some targets. On the social side, what we have done so far, if I could take some examples, is that obviously we do track the number of workers in the factory. We try to see in terms of how many full-time workers, how many contract workers. And the reason we do that is that sometimes it is possible that the contract workers might not get the same benefits as the full-time workers. That's basic social security benefits or job security. Are they getting, let's say, the same kind of treatment as the workers on the roll? That's one part. The other part is in terms of how do you take these workers up the ladder. So it's not sufficient if an operator is just an operator. Can they become supervisors and then can they become managers? So we do look for, in some cases, we also try to see if we can support them on building that strategy. It could be a gender strategy, or it could be more of a retention, recruitment, and upskilling strategy also. And
Mm.
then we take those KPIs. Okay, let's see in this year how many, let's say, female supervisors are you able to upskill and recruit within the factory, and can we set some targets for that? So I think we have been able to do some of those examples, but we can do a lot more.
That's very
Besides what you're saying.
interesting. So I mean, we can have a discussion and debate about what the KPI should be, and you've also talked about it sounds like they're contextual or factory or company specific, of course. Um, but this idea that not only are we going to invest in you and work with you on the environmental side, but there also has to be these other improvements along the way, of course, makes a lot of sense. Do you also think about collective bargaining or those kinds of things? Are those part of that discussion, or are there certain things that you don't address that the unions and such are more designed to do?
No, I think that's a interesting question, because I think the way we're set up is we do look at all of these aspects in our evaluation. So we try to understand if these workers are, let's say, unionized. Do they have representation? For the most part, every factory, at least the ones that we've seen, have some kind of a works committee that has a representative of the worker themselves. But it remains to be seen how effective they are. So on policy and on paper, you do see these, let's say, this representation. Collective bargaining is interesting, but we don't see that too often also. Probably for the second fund, we are thinking more in terms of responsible purchasing practices, as it were,
Mm.
both in terms of long-term offtake agreements, moving beyond purchase orders, for instance, and how do you essentially make that relationship a bit more even. That's something that we're focusing on. But I think this idea of social within the factory is so complex, and it's tied to cultural elements. It's tied a lot to the business side. There's some, let's say, political tones also. So it's a messy topic, but there are, let's say, low hanging opportunities that you can focus on to make those initial improvements already.
Okay, and as you know, if we speak narrowly, which sometimes is problematic, around global warming and climate change, now we're even talking about the needs for not just mitigation but adaptation, and that it's getting much hotter, uh, that the workers are uh, particularly vulnerable now. We've had interviews with representatives from unions in India who said their colleagues are experiencing serious, if not risk, to their lives because of the heat, and that basic things like more toilets, more breaks, more water, these things have to now be addressed because global warming is not in the future. It's happening now and affecting people's lives now. So I just bring that up because I can imagine as you move forward into your next fund, you also need to adapt to the changing environment. Is there anything there that you reflect on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even for the existing fund and the investment that we have made as part of the process and the evaluation, we do identify, let's say, intervention points. A lot of these are, of course, focused on occupational health and safety, which is obviously one of the key pillars of the ILO as well. So it's very much something that we are actively doing, in the current fund. Yeah, I think stories about heat strokes and really uncomfortable conditions in the factories. This is the reality. When you talk about climate action, it affects the people very, very deeply. So for us, what we have tried to do within the, let's say, scope of influence that we have is at least try to make sure that the infrastructure of the factories are good. It offers a safe working environment for the workers, and that they can continue working on these improvements year on, both in terms of, let's say, systems that we have put in terms of monitoring. But as we kind of go along, we do need to expand that focus further for sure. Because any piece of equipment or machinery that we fund or finance, it does have an impact on the people. So we need to look at it in terms of totality, in terms of, is it going to help them or is it make their life easier? One quick example that I can give you is one of the tier three factories that we invested in Tamil Nadu. They previously had a manual doffing system. If you know how doffing works, you need to remove these bobbins individually. There's a lot of, let's say, manual work involved. And we funded an auto doffing system. Now, what that's done is obviously cut down times in terms of what you need to do, and it's also improved the, let's say, relative comfort of the workers there also.
Okay.
The interesting thing about the funding that we provide is we can also use it for civil works as well. So if they want to change the lights, change the, I don't know, exhaust system or the ventilation system, they're more than happy, free to do so, which they have done. And it's quite nice to see these improvements right in front of your eyes, because you know how it was. And some of these factories that we funded are legacy factories, 30, 40 years old. So you can make those improvements immediately. So the technology is already here and the willingness to do so is already here. It's just the capital that is taking longer to reach them. Hopefully we're leading the way in that front.
Okay. So I know that you've recently produced a short report that says, here are the things that you've learned. And Bob talked a little bit about learnings. You've talked a little bit about learnings. Are there any other particular things that you're like, from this process, we've identified these 3 to 5 things that are crucial? Have we covered those, or are there some more you wanted to highlight?
I think we've covered a little bit, but if I can maybe summarize quite
Yeah.
quickly, I believe the topic on access to capital is hotly spoken about. Our view is access to capital is not really the issue. There is sufficient capital available in the local markets. I think we do need to acknowledge that. But what is probably not there is in terms of capital that rewards sustainability or investments in sustainability or moving towards, let's say, more sustainable manufacturing. So you need smart patient capital, which someone like an impact investor like us or any others on the market can do. And it's about reducing those barriers for the manufacturers to kind of go along in those journeys. So that's one key.
I mean, that's a super important learning. I'm pausing because I'm thinking that is the challenge with our current economic model, is that we don't reward the traditional externalities, the social and environmental performance. So you're saying to me there's capital there, but it's never or rarely linked to good performance in these other areas. And an impact fund such as yours does this, and so should be a model for, I don't know, everyone.
For scale, yeah, no, that's. I think that's what we're trying to say. Ultimately, if we talk about, if I use financial jargon, what we're trying to say is that the current processes that are there, they're not well set up to underwrite investments in sustainability. So in that sense, how do you evaluate an investment in a piece of machinery or in a factory, and how do you quantify the impact that you get out of it? Because what we're talking about is impact, not just managing compliance or risk alone. We want to create positive impact. So what can we do more? So those systems are still not yet there, but we are seeing some early movement in terms of those changes. So that's definitely our learning. The second thing is, I think we very clearly also need to provide technical assistance or support for the factories or for the suppliers. So it's not just sufficient if you provide money or capital. You also need to add value, both in terms of giving them access to the right technologies. In several cases, the entrepreneurs running these businesses are well aware in terms of what they need, or they probably have an idea in terms of what they need to do. Where they need the support is in terms of choosing the right technology for their factory within the context of their overall operations and being able to verify that impact. So I think ultimately money without support will probably only lead to poor outcomes. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the disconnect that we see between the brands and the suppliers. And I think I probably don't need to spell this out, probably preaching to the choir, is that while unit prices are going down, considering where we are within the global environment, there's also constant pressure to keep improving. that doesn't make any sense to us because ultimately the risk of all these investments, as you also said, falls on the suppliers. So that's the reason why we also think that there should be initiatives like us and others in the market that push for these more equal partnerships between the brands and the suppliers. And they're a lot, and the suppliers are quite ambitious. They, as I said, they have the willingness and the risk appetite to do so. They just need a right partner, be it from an investor or from the brand, to take them along with that journey.
And that piece there, is that the better buying approach that you're suggesting is a way to solve that power imbalance and that discrepancy, or how does the fund come in to help address that?
Yeah, good question. I think what we're trying to do, at least for the next iteration of the fund, which we'll talk a little bit more about, is as part of the investment package, can we make the brand commit to certain parameters or to certain expectations or in terms of what they can provide to the supplier? We think the better buying or the responsible purchasing practices should be, let's say, the foundation, because contractually, let's say not every supplier has the legal muscle to be ready to kind of negotiate those contracts or understand in terms of what it means for them. And we also want brands to stay in that journey for at least for the period of the investment, so that they're also in that journey. So I think that should be the foundation.
Okay, I know I jumped the gun because I was
Yeah,
so interested in that. You
yeah.
wanted to also wrap up with another learning.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the last thing I want to say is ultimately this is a demonstration fund. So what we're trying to say is success breeds success. So the nice thing about what we've been able to do is our fifth investment was actually referred to by our second investment in India. So the moment someone sees an organization like us moving in with capital, putting our money into these factories, automatically the people in that cluster are like, okay, maybe this person in this factory is doing this, so why can't we also do this? So there's a very clear ripple effect across those peers, and we are seeing this quite actively in both of the regions, both in India and Bangladesh, because we are fairly under the radar, or at least we've been fairly under the radar. We try to kind of engage with the sector as much as possible, but it's so powerful when a supplier vouches for you and says that this kind of a model does work, and that's what we're looking to do more and more as we look to scale and impact.
So should we talk about that then?
Yeah.
Should we talk about the next steps, both of you? Because obviously you're saying you've shown that you can do this with the model. Obviously, it was a demonstration fund. You have a lot of kinks in any demonstration fund, but you said you've been able to achieve pretty substantial environmental gains and social improvements while giving a return to the, I guess what you call them, the mezzanine and senior investors. Um, and now you're saying let's take this learning and scale this up, right? And in my mind I go, great, we always want to scale, we need to do this more and more. I'm thinking of the macro scale. You said with the open supply hub you see thousands of factories, um, so we need a lot of this, a lot of scale, don't we? So on a macro level, what's your goal for the second fund? How much more of a scale can you make this? And what do you think could be also the ripple effect? You mentioned that there's a lot of financing available in local regional markets, but it's not tied to sustainability. Could this fund also be something that local regional markets start to model and have impact funds as well, not just the good fashion fund? So a lot of questions there, but I guess first and foremost, what are you going to do to take it to the next step in this second round?
You want to take that one, Bob?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can kick off, and please add anything there. So, so as we mentioned, so what we do typically with a follow-up fund is that we look at the learnings, and we just gone through a couple of those good learnings. I think one of the learnings as well, and there is funding available within the local financial sector, but it's often working capital related, and it does not, as also Jay was saying, it does not really reward any sustainability. So what we've done so far, we really built up close partnership with our investees, and we've been more than just a financing party. We've really been a partner. So we really want to become a little bit more of a partner to the suppliers, which means that instead of providing long-term debt, we will actually move a bit more towards risk capital. So there can be everything that's basically subordinated to the local funding, which can actually help the suppliers to attract additional funding because it's different kind of capital, which is subordinated. But also it gives us the opportunity to work even closer with those suppliers and make them part of our, I would say, our network in that respect. We can link them to initiatives that we know that we're around. We can link them, for instance, to brands and others. So we really become a partner for them to grow on the commercial, on the management side, but also on the social and environmental side. So it's really more towards the risk capital, which is different from what is available, because particularly in the segment, what we're looking at, which is, as I mentioned before, for the first fund was between the 10 and 100 million revenues. Funding is available, risk capital is not available. So that's something that is really missing, where we think also with our approach and with our network and our learnings, we can really help them.
So for the audience, can you explain a little bit more what's the difference between debt and risk in terms of, and why?
Yeah, sure. So risk capital or whatever mezzanine capital, what it means that typically that what we've done so far with the first fund is that we were always at the same level at this at par basically with the local banks. So whatever we did, it was just another layer of particular debt. What we're doing right now is we're going to looking a bit more at patient and smart capital, which is not just a repayment schedule which starts from year 1 or year 2, but it's basically also a longer grace period. It's subordinated, so in case there would be any issues, that the debt could always be paid back before we actually getting paid back in case of issues. So I think that what it helps is it's not another debt burden. It's really like a partnership. It's not equity, and we do that deliberately because we think in the market that we're looking at, particularly the niche that we're looking at, that is often family companies. So it's really difficult as an outsider to enter in there as an equity partner. So we really want to be providing risk, so non-debt, so not the straightforward debt and repayment schedules, but a bit more, that could be performance linked, that could be any whatever linkage you have in there. And be that additional, I would say, layer between the equity and the debt that they can get from the local banks.
So why, if I'm an investor,
yeah,
and I'm, as you say, risk investor, do I go in and I sort of say I still want a return of a certain point, a certain amount at a certain point, but here I'm more flexible and when I get it, or I still don't fully understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for a fund setup, it means that we will. If you just take one step back, I think the kind of due diligence and partnership and analysis that we do is typically what you would not see from a normal debt provider. It's been the way we approach this has been always being along the lines of an equity provider. So we do understand really well how these operate or how these companies operate. And I think in the end, as we said, we've done 6 investments. We went to thorough due diligence for more than 10, and we looked at more than 100 companies. So we know, we think that we know where the risks are and how these companies operate. So I think in terms of the risk of making an investment, yes, it's a different kind of capital, which will also be subordinated, but we are the party really understanding where the companies are going, what are the key issues there, and what are the challenges, and how do they basically mitigate those. So from an investor point of view, I think what you see is that given our track record that we have and the network that we have, that there's still confidence that we will certainly get a return, and that might even be higher than the first fund, because we have all the methodologies, the processes, and it will be a bigger fund as well. So that makes, in the end, also scale works on that side in terms of efficiency. So yes, as an investor, you would still certainly get a return on this one. And also return is not just financial, it's also impact, because another linkage that we really will do is that we're going to work closer with a number of brands that are already active on doing social, in some cases environmental benefits for the suppliers, but we're working closer with the brands, and it's better buying, whatever responsible purchasing practices. We see it more as an equal partnership. So we want to be working with brands and their suppliers where there's a real equal partnership, where we also help, for instance, the suppliers in making sure how they can comply with the new regulations coming up. They've been watered down a bit, but they will still be coming. But also we want to be working in this respect, for instance, with the brands. So we really want to be somewhere in the middle, making sure that not all the issues and not all the requirements that are at brand level are actually pushed down towards the supplier, but it's a joint effort. It's really about equal partnership. So it's still
So
in.
tell me a little bit about just let's take the brands for instance. So you want to now engage brands to invest in the fund?
No,
Uh,
not necessarily. No,
how would it work? No.
yeah, so we will have partnerships, and we do this basically with other funds as well. We have different kind of partners. They could be investors that would maybe give them a little bit more leverage, but basically we have a partnership with a number of brands. And in first instance, what we're currently looking at is that we're working with our partner Fair Wear Foundation, who has been really helping us and on the social side and on the environmental social action plans. And we're looking at it's a member brand setup, so we're looking at their brand members, which are not the biggest, but there are some bigger brands in there. And what we do a partnership with them where we see what plans they have on the environmental and social side going forward, and we see then as a fund how we can accelerate that by, for instance, by providing funding and finance. But in return, we do require a commitment from the brands in order to take those steps on their side as well. That can be in kind. It doesn't never necessarily have to be financing in the fund or investing in the fund, but we want something in parallel that we all aligned and that we want to make it happen. So it's a brand partnership, which is different, let's say, from an investor in the fund, because that makes, I think, also particularly for the brands that we're looking at, makes life in that respect a bit harder to have an investment in the fund there as well.
Okay. So what's the goal then for this second round? How big should the fund be this next go round? What are you hoping success will look like? How many brands and suppliers do you think should be involved? Give us a sense of what your goals are.
Sure. I think this is, we're still modest in that respect because I know there's a lot needed. Again, it's more like a demonstration and scaling at the same time. I think the second fund, we're aiming at around 60 million, 60. And the reason that we're doing that is that we're going to work with a number of brands, which would probably be between 3 and 5 brands. We're going to look at a few more countries. So far, we've been looking at India and Bangladesh. We're also going to add Vietnam and likely also Turkey to that. So we have a few more countries that we're going to look at where we work with local networks. And we're going to establish the brands as such. And we just very recently, we also received a grant for setting up and establishing that fund from the Catalytic Climate Finance Facility, which is a cooperation between Convergent and the Climate Policy Initiatives. So what we're looking there is as well, in addition to setting up the fund, is refining, updating the measurement work, the impact and the ENS policies, but also looking more at the climate justice and I think at the social justice as well.
Okay, so you're going to though you're going to have some what do you say? We talked about the 3 levels, right? So you have those who want impact, those who are mezzanine type, and those who are sort of senior investors. Will still have that kind of setup?
You will still have the blended finance setup, but because we had the initial fund and we have the track record and we have the whole knowledge of the market and the partners, you would need significantly less junior for the fund. So it gives you more ability to scale.
Okay. So 60 million, moving ahead from the learnings, showing that this can be done also in other countries and regions, is the ambition. But as you say, it's also, there's so much that needs to be done beyond just 60 million fund, here's dollar fund. Do you see that this can have a ripple effect more immediately in other ecosystems of financing that aren't the good fashion fund? Can you spread your model beyond just your own so that it moves more quickly throughout the industry? How can we learn from what you did, even if you're not going to implement a bigger fund? Is this something that you think other types of financial investors could be interested in and try to duplicate?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think so. That's in the impact investment space where we're operating in. There's so much to be done, and we're really happy to, and that's what we're going to do with the first one, to share our learnings and how to take it forward. Because we also see that our 60 million is not going to change the full world, but I think our model can really be applied to a lot of other different setups. And I think the model can be replicated in different countries. I think it's important. What we also want to demonstrate is you see currently, and really happy to see that there are quite a few new initiatives, but they're often sort of targeted at, I would say, at the higher end of the bigger SMEs, or the bigger, not even SMEs, the bigger companies. What we do is really, and if you look at the markets, it's where the vast amount of manufacturers are. It's really in those mid scales, and that's all the initiatives. Often, I think, are targeted, let's say, the top 5 or 10%. And I think there's a lot to be done at that other level. But then you need to know how it works, how to approach it, how to measure the impact. And that's what we try to do as well. So the second fund is a scaling fund, but at the same time, also a demonstration fund. And we're really happy to work also with other partners that are around. So, of course, you have the AII, there are a lot of other parties as well. We love to work with them. And the same applies to local financial institutions, because you mentioned it earlier. In the end, our success, what would our success be? Our success would be that we're no longer needed. That's the real success. So in the end, that the local financial institution could take over. They see the value of sustainability in addition to the financial value. So that's what we're aiming for in the longer term. So we know with this 60 million, we're not going to change it, but by demonstrating what we know and linking to others, we have a much bigger sort of ripple effect than we actually would have with the only 60 million fund.
Right. And I was going to ask about Apparel Impact Institute, how you're similar or different. And it sounds like the Apparel Impact Institute is targeting at least mainly some of the bigger, larger emitters. How do you see where you are similar or complement, and how you are different?
I think we're quite complementary to the AII. I think the nice thing, as I said, is there are so few of us working on the financing piece currently within the industry. So the only way to move forward is to kind of see in terms of how we can help each other. But if you make a comparison, we see AI as a platform that really convenes the overall sector. They have solutions like the CSP, and I think they also have the Fashion Climate Fund. So they have been able to raise philanthropic capital and also, let's say, commitments from the brands also towards this particular system change that we're talking about. I think what we've done is we've just gone straight to the factories. We felt that we need to kind of have these stories from the ground, particularly from the deeper tiers, and we need to showcase these investment models very clearly. With our expertise is we know how to move capital in, how to manage it, and hopefully how to get it out safely as well, with the impact that we're talking about. And I think the key to doing that is to have those relationships directly with the manufacturers in the way that we said, long-term, flexible, and linked to impact. So I would say within the spectrum, we're coming at from different angles. So a lot of, let's say, awareness and ambition that initiative like the AI has. I think we've focused on a lot of execution and implementation and demonstration, which we're hoping to do more of in the second part as well. And the nice thing is, again, if we compare timeframes, pre-COVID and post-COVID, there is a lot more interest in investing within the textile and garment industry for sure. We are seeing that, be it from the larger private sector banks globally, or even within the governments. There are policies coming up that kind of encourages green financing, as they call it. And you have, let's say, players within the impact investing space targeting a higher tier of companies, still maybe within upper tier of the SMEs, maybe, but maybe at higher returns using different instruments. But that interest is still there. So, but because you brought up AII specifically, I think we do have a complementary role to kind of play for the longer term.
And I was also thinking, even though, as you said, junior investors, Bob, you need less of them in this new fund because you've shown and proven what you can do. There seems to be still in some countries, not to name one that maybe currently is not that interested in this, but in some countries, there's still an interest from development aid organizations or governments to finance a model that's more commercially driven like this. Do you see that partners could also be governments and public agencies, or is it only private capital or private philanthropic capital that you're interested in?
No, you're right. I think there will still, although I think also coming back to your point, I think globally, of course, with all the turmoil in different levels and different regions, you do see a shift towards a slightly different sort of deployment or allocation by governments of funding, but there will still be funding available by government-linked organizations, and also for the Good Fashion Fund, the same applies. So, in that respect, we started with the Lourdes Foundation really as initiator and the big sponsor of the fund. But there is certainly space for government money and also for government-linked money. With our other funds, for instance, we have the Dutch government in there, we have the GEF in there, so and also the IFCs and the FMOs. So I think that is really the area that we're looking into. So that's why we also see the opportunity to scale, because I think that's really money that's well used, and it's focusing, it's looking at scaling, it's looking at new models that can be replicated, but it's also looking at a decent and adequate return that probably from a financial point of view can be achieved, in addition to very clear impact. And that's what we've seen already with the first fund, and we will keep on sort of demonstrating that for the second fund. So yes, there's certainly space, and that's certainly also something we're exploring for government and government-linked money in this fund as well.
Okay. Last question. If you both had a wish that could come true in the next, I don't know, 6 months to a year to 2 years, maybe that's too far out, that's related to this work, okay? Not broader wishes, related to this work, that would dramatically, you think, sort of change the game or shift the scaling up of these models and have the scaling up of this impact. What would your wish be? I know it's not necessarily a fair question, but what would your wish be if you could pick one thing to move the needle much more dramatically? Let's start with Bob.
Yeah, so my wish would be, and I think that's more in general, take into account really the environmental and but also social implications and impact that you can make in the investments that you're doing. And I think in worldwide, well, you do see some movement away from that. And I think particularly in a sector like the apparel sector, it needs to become more circular, and it needs to become more inclusive. I think that is really needed. So we need to find a way jointly, and let's do it jointly. Let's not all separately in our own sort of area of work. Let's not all do the same thing. Let's work together, because we need to do it. There's so much to be done still in this sector, and I would really like investors from different angles to ensure that we keep on and even accelerate the investments in really impactful sectors like the apparel sector, because there is a lot to be gained still. And with everything going on, we should not forget that this is about people in the end, and this is about actually living wages. It's about the way they work. It is really, we're confronted basically with all the apparel and all the clothing that we do see, but there's really so much behind it. And let's everyone be aware of that, and let's work together to make it happen. But really, don't look just at the finance. Really look at the broad, holistic view. That's really what I want. It's not for the first 6 months, not for the first 2 years, but it's really, I think, as a general, this should be the underlying for everything that should be done in the sector.
Okay, Jan.
I think my wish is if we can change perception completely and have everyone treat the textile and apparel supply chain as climate critical, infrastructure, like the way we've done for electric vehicles or for solar panels. I think that would be my wish, and I think the reason I say that is just imagine, if every brand that we know of even uses like a tiny few percentage points of, for example, their procurement budget to kind of supply or to finance the decarbonization element, that I presume is going to go a long way in meeting those funding gaps, these big numbers that you typically see floating around. Because ultimately, as I said before, The technologies are there. The suppliers are ready. I think what we need is capital and courage and collaboration to kind of meet them in that journey. And that would really be my wish. And I echo what Bob said also. I think there's a lot to be done. But if I can finish with these three C's, I think that'll be my wish for the industry.
Jayanth, Bob, thank you very, very much for today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.